Well, I'd like to welcome you all. I'm Helen Haste, and with Murray Levinson, we coordinate the Civic and Moral Education Initiative with the help of Brian, who runs things for us. I'm delighted to welcome you all today to this event. Can I ask you please, you are already on the mailing list. Brian's going to hand around a sign-up sheet. If you could just put your name on it, write it clearly, and also put your email address. Then we can make sure that you know in future you'll be receiving invitations to our events this semester. We're delighted today to welcome Lydia Ross. Lydia graduated from here in 2013, and I asked her just now whether or not it felt like coming home. She said yes and no. And also we have Flossie Chua, who's going to be discussing. Lydia is very successful at what she does. It's lovely to have her back. I'm delighted to hear what she's going to talk about. She's working at the Contemporary Art Institute, Contemporary Museum of Art in Chicago. Right, I got it in the wrong order. That's right, something like that.
The words are right.
Where she is managing the school and teacher education programs. And great tribute to her abilities, she was, in 2017, she was named the Museum Art Educator of the Year for Illinois, the Illinois Art Education Institution. And she said when she was given the award, "I believe museum education, driven by a vision of artists and the expertise of teachers, can play a critical role in fostering social and civic imagination and can empower young people and communities to critically reflect on and shape their work." And she uses contemporary art as a catalyst in doing this, and we'll see this afternoon how she does that. Now, her background, before she came here, she was working at Creative Time in New York, so she was in New York for a number of years as well. Creative Time is New York's vanguard public art organisation. Yes, I was inspired by the artists I collaborated with and their work in addressing civic and social issues. So I think the integration of art and civics is represented by not only by Lydia's work but by her enthusiasm for it. I'm looking forward very much to hearing what she is going to say. Now Flossie, who's going to be a commentator, thank you Flossie. Flossie Chua is Senior Research Manager at Project Zero, and her work is particularly focusing on how we can nurture good thinking and practices that develop the capacity for informed and positive action. She is working on a project called Arts as Civic Commons, which seeks to understand how contemporary visual artists engage with social and civic ideas and issues in their artistic practices, and how these patterns of engagement inform institutions, schools, and so on. So it's going to be a rich and artistic afternoon. So, Lydia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Helen, so much for inviting me to speak, and thank you all for coming out this afternoon. It's really exciting. This is the first time I'm back on AP & Way 5 years after graduating, and I'm excited to share some work that I've been doing over the last few years that would not have been possible without taking Helen's Civic Education and Civic Action class, which actually took place in this room.
It did actually, yeah.
Yeah, so that's strange and cool. And of course, Steve Seidel's core classes in Arts and Education. I am a proud AIE alum. So, the title of my presentation asks, how can contemporary art reshape civic education? This question stems from a larger concern that's guided my work and that I trust everyone in this room shares, which is how can we support young people in expressing themselves and taking informed action about the issues they care most about? To briefly answer both of these questions, I would argue that young people already have a voice, and I think we've all seen that through the Parkland students from Florida in the last few days, and countless other examples. So they have a voice, and what contemporary art can do so powerfully is provide students with a creative and critical toolkit for expressing that voice and taking informed action. So if we're asking what exactly are the strategies or tools that contemporary artists use that can have pedagogical value within the context of civic education and civic engagement, I would argue that they ask provocative questions which force us to interrogate ourselves and our world in new ways. They propose alternative strategies and modes of engaging with seemingly intractable problems, and they imagine radical futures and possibilities for change, inspiring us to dream along with them. So how can we bring the best of what contemporary artists do and have to offer into a public school setting with the goal of supporting creative and engaged young people? One promising model that I'm excited to have as the focus of my lecture for this afternoon is the SPACE program, which is an acronym for the School Partnership for Art and Civic Engagement, which was created at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago, where I'm proud to work. I'm excited to take you through the journey of developing the SPACE program, what it looks like in action, some of the challenges and opportunities, and then get to the most exciting part, which is opening up the room for discussion that I hope will also push my thinking as a program manager. So because all programs are designed and implemented within specific contexts, I'd like to speak briefly about the MCA's vision and programming and our long-standing work with Chicago public school students. The Museum of Contemporary Art is located in downtown Chicago, and our vision is to be an artist-activated and audience-engaged museum. I am a member of the Learning and Public Programs team, which has 12 full-time staff members and a team of 12 part-time artist guides. Our work is concerned with making the museum a space for civic exchange, cultivating deep and sustained partnerships across the city, and helping audiences connect what they see in the museum to what's happening in our world. We recently completed a renovation in honor of our 50th anniversary, where we relocated all of the education spaces which had formerly been in the basement to the physical heart of the museum, so that as soon as you walk in, you see a new learning space called the Commons, which is a free space designed to be a place for civic and artistic exchange, and built a new floor to house our education studios, so all the young people who come in our building get the best view, which is of Lake Michigan. So in this slide, I've provided an overview of the learning programs. The other part of the department deals with public programs, but I'm not going to go into that now. So I manage the suite of school and teacher programs, and through those programs, we serve about 10,000 young people from across Chicago and Illinois every year through free field trips, teacher professional development programs, which range from 2-hour workshops to a year-long teacher institute, and in-depth school partnerships with both elementary and high school students. About 90% of the young people that we serve come from Chicago public schools. Socioeconomically, Chicago public school students are from disproportionately low income backgrounds as opposed to the rest of the state. And funding within Chicago public schools is disproportionate depending on the location of the schools, particularly on Chicago's south and west sides. Talk about problems in CPS could be the focus of an entirely separate lecture, but my point here is that we are operating as a partner within an inequitable school system. Therefore, it's been core to our museum's mission to serve the schools who have the least access to arts and cultural resources. All of the programs that you see here are led by our team of artist guides, who are Chicago-based artists with active studio practices who have experience and passion for working with young people. We approach our gallery teaching through inquiry-based dialogue. Our goal is much less about teaching art history than it is to use works of contemporary art as springboards for discussing the issues of our time and helping connect art to young people's lived experiences. Our more in-depth programs like the Teacher Institute support teachers on creating socially engaged art projects in collaboration with their 1st through 12th grade students. Our multiple visit program brings elementary school teachers to the museum for repeat professional development sessions and their students come for 3 extended field trips to focus on developing their speaking and listening skills and to help make the museum a connected part of their classroom learning. So this was a snapshot of our programs around 2015, and our suite of programs was quite full. However, in early 2015, we were given an opportunity that we could not walk away from. So the spark for the SPACE program came when a funder approached our team, which included former education director Heidi Reitmeyer and the deputy director of learning Marissa Reyes. And this funder asked us, what would you do with $1 million? Like, at work. With work, not in your own lives. And at first we were like, oh my God, we could see like we could do 1 million field trips, and we could do 5 teacher institutes and 3 multiple visit programs. And immediately we're just like, how do we do more of what we already do? And then when we took a step back, we realized what this funder is actually asking us is, what kind of deep impact do we want to have on learning? What are the pressing needs in our field that a new program could help address? So with that question and a desire to get a piece of that pie, this sent us into over a year of research and development, reflecting on best practices within the local and national landscape of art education, both within and beyond museums. So our literature and field research took us across the country. We looked at New York City's Center for Urban Pedagogy, or CUP, which brings students out into the community to dig into and respond to local policy issues such as waste management or public transportation. We went to Los Angeles to study LACNA's partnership with the Charles White Elementary School, which puts an artist in residence in the school to ultimately mount an exhibition in a gallery in collaboration with the students. We researched the Turnaround Arts program, which was started during the Obama administration, in which federal dollars are invested into struggling schools, focusing on how the arts can be a catalyst for turning those struggling schools into thriving communities. Related to the Turnaround Arts program, there were a series of recommendations that came out of the work of the President's Committee on Arts and Humanities, and these 3 guiding principles, or these 3 recommendations rather, became 3 guiding principles for how we started to think about what a new model could look like. When we turned our sights back home, we knew that in spite of tremendous gains that had been made since the creation of a CPS arts education plan that was a citywide effort to improve equity, access, and the quality of art education in public schools, there were huge gaps, particularly on Chicago's south and west sides. What's more, during this time, we were operating in a statewide budget crisis. We had no budget. And we all know that the arts are often the first thing on the chopping block. So as one of CPS's top 10 cultural providers, we wanted to make sure that whatever new initiative we were developing was designed to support the district's art education priorities in spite of their financial challenges. Serendipitously, as we were developing ideas for a new program, major shifts in civic education were happening across Illinois. A law was passed that declared as of July 2016, Illinois would commit to state graduation requirements that included at least 1 semester's worth of civic content for students who were entering the 9th grade in that school year. The law declared civics course content shall focus on government institutions, the discussion of current and controversial issues, service learning, and simulations of democratic processes. Despite these impending mandated changes, the state did not lay out any implementation plans or requirements, which left districts and schools with a lot of flexibility to figure out how to do that, but as is characteristic of CPS, widely different access to the human and financial resources to do so. We believed that our museum and the artists that we worked with could play an important role in thinking through the challenges around these new requirements creatively, particularly in the realm of dialogue around current and controversial issues, democratic processes, and service learning. The importance of civic education was not just a Chicago issue. And I would like to say that we spent a long time looking at the work of Mira Levinson and later discovered this research out of Tufts that continue to argue for the critical role of equitable civic education in supporting a thriving democratic society. The dramatic change in civic requirements came the driving force behind our potential new model. And we again articulated the question I raised in the beginning. How can a museum education program best support young people in expressing themselves and taking informed action about the issues that they care most about? We decided to focus on high school age students because we felt we could do more intellectually ambitious work, and also because these students were either approaching or at voting age, so the stakes were a little bit higher. Our team already knew through programs like our Teacher Institute that contemporary art and artists have so much to offer in the realm of creative civic engagement. With their provocative questions, they're proposing alternative strategies for addressing problems and engaging our radical imaginations. We also decided that we wanted to focus on having a whole school impact, as opposed to the suite of existing programs which brought single or pair teachers together from across multiple schools. We were excited to have the opportunity to reshape school climate and curriculum. As we began to lay out different potential models for a new program, we kept returning to the role of the living artist. And this is where my work at Harvard came most clearly back into the picture. This is a screenshot for a paper proposal that I wrote exactly to the date 5 years ago in Helen's Civic Education and Civic Action class. During that class, I was constantly thinking about how can contemporary artists shape civic education within K-12 settings. It's really cool that we're back in this particular classroom. So at the core of this, albeit loosely proposed model, was the idea to embed artists into public schools. The more that our team discussed this, the more the idea of the artist embedded into a public school became the distinguishing feature of our imagined model. We started to articulate why embedding an artist could be so critical to addressing this question of supporting young people and being change agents. First, we felt that embedding an artist in a public school could create a mechanism for interdisciplinary collaboration that might not exist otherwise in the regular structure of a school day. We knew that we wanted to bridge arts and civics classes and content, and I know from the hundreds of teachers that I've worked with that they are all hungry for that kind of collaboration, but with the grind of a school day, it's harder to figure out how to get that done. Second, the artist would exist as a living, hyper-visible model for how to do civically engaged work, as they share past projects and make new art alongside students. In fact, we felt that participating in this program would be part of their artistic practice. Plus, a program like this with the right financial resources could become a huge way of financially supporting artists. Finally, we felt that embedding an artist in a school would offer the students another adult role model, someone who was consistently there, and someone whose sole purpose was to help students express their voice. So we felt that this program could also play a role in supporting students' social emotional learning. We also felt very confident that Chicago was a perfect city to launch a program like this. Chicago has a deeply rich history of socially engaged art, from the Chicago Public Art Group and history of public murals starting in the 60s and 70s, to artists like Theaster Gates, who are thinking about blurring the lines between art and urban design and how art can have the power to shape cities. We felt like this program would also be a way for a major museum to increase the visibility of these kind of artistic practices and artists whose names maybe hadn't been known up to this point. As a team, we landed on 5 priorities that would ground this new program, this program that would become the School Partnership for Art and Civic Engagement. So now comes the most fun part of my presentation, for me at least, where I get to tell you all about the SPACE program, how it developed in terms of frameworks, learning outcomes, and what it's looked like in implementation. So what is SPACE? SPACE is a multi-year partnership with Chicago Public High Schools, and its goal is to empower Chicago teens to create positive change in their communities using contemporary art strategies and expanded civic understandings. SPACE embeds artists and their studio practices inside these high schools, physically transforming spaces in the school into hubs for creative and civic exchange. We invite artists whose work addresses social issues, who see their practice across disciplines and different media, who embrace collaboration and public interaction. These are the kind of artists we want catalyzing the learning in SPACE. With support from school administrators, we've taken over unused or abandoned spaces in the school and transformed them into artist studios, as opposed to a lot of residencies where artists come in and are present inside other teachers' classrooms. The SPACE artists work in partnership with select art teachers and social studies or civics teachers to co-design and co-teach interdisciplinary curriculum on contemporary art and civic engagement, curriculum that is taught in art classes and civics classes. The artists are on site every week of the school year for about 15 hours a week, teaching in the art and civics classes, planning with the teachers, making their own art in the studio, and devising engagement opportunities for the wider school community. The overarching goals of our program are to use contemporary art practice to research local civic issues and mobilize student and community action, to provide a model for interdisciplinary learning with art at the core, and to present multiple opportunities for positive change-making action that's driven by students. We worked closely with evaluation consultants to articulate learning outcomes for all stakeholders, students, teachers, the artists, us as an institution, the MCA, community members, school administrators. For brevity's sake, I'm just sharing the 4 student learning outcomes, but would be happy to share others. These outcomes were designed specifically to meet both Illinois civics and art standards. I spent what felt like months just reading standards, and I actually found it really exciting because when I read them, I was like, yes, this is exactly what artists do. This is awesome. So standards are great. They can be. So we're designing this program in alignment with the standards that we're addressing students' research, inquiry, and analysis skills, their ability to develop projects, to present to audiences and get feedback, to draw from multiple sources, and particularly relevant for civics, to take action. We developed a curriculum framework that was 5 steps that would help guide students through the civically engaged artistic process. We wanted to create a framework that no matter what class it was in or what school it was in, every student was on the same path, using the same vocabulary, developing the same critical thinking skills and civic understandings, even if the art projects could and should look different. We also wanted to create a framework that could be expanded or condensed in a semester-long class or a year-long class. This year alone, we're working in 2 schools. We're working in 1 multimedia art class with complete curricular flexibility and an AP Studio Art class that has a ton of demands around students' portfolios. We're embedding space inside of civics content inside of an AP government class for freshmen that's happening over the course of a year. We're also doing space in a civics class that's a semester long with juniors. So we needed something that was really flexible. So to talk a little bit through this framework, and I'll dive into more concrete examples in just a minute, to begin the program, the SPACE artists and teachers introduce students to the core concepts of the program. What is contemporary art? What is civic engagement? And what do these 2 things have to do with each other? Students are introduced to these core concepts first through their embedded artists' practice. the artists devised hands-on workshops that would help expose students in an active way to what their art looked like and felt like. Importantly, this is one of the places where the MCA itself came into focus. Students come near the very beginning of the year to the museum for a field trip looking at works of art in our galleries, led by our team of artist guides who are helping students explore what are the civic issues that artists are dealing with? What questions are they asking us about the world through their artworks? What are they asking us to do or think about in response? And also by showing students a variety of different kinds of contemporary art, starting to open up their minds in a different space than the school to how many different forms contemporary art can take. In the next two steps, the teams and students begin to identify the local issues that they care most about and are coached through asking the who, what, why, and how behind these issues. Students dig into the root causes behind the issues and often begin to uncover larger systemic issues at play. For example, vacant lots in their neighborhoods aren't merely an eyesore or an invitation to crime. They're connected to long-standing issues of segregation, housing discrimination, and policies like redlining. In these steps, we're constantly bringing in works of contemporary art to both show the students how artists are addressing these issues and also to use the images as catalysts for conversation. As a team, and particularly with the MCA staff, we've developed a database of over 70 artist case studies from the last 10 years or so, mainly in Chicago, but also across the country and internationally, that have about 12 or 20 different civic issues. What were the issues? What were the artistic strategies? What were the learning goals? What were some of the tools that they used? So that students have ongoing access to all of these different ideas. Then we step back to see how are other people dealing with these issues from across disciplines. So not just artists, but who are community partners that could inform how we're thinking about these issues? We partnered with a local library with a teen program manager who was thinking about issues of community safety. We partnered with a local community organizer who came in to talk to students about her own activist path, and we went to their offices to see how community organizers work and are starting to address the same issues that students cared about. We invited other guest artists to come and talk about their practice, and students come back to the MCA to see new examples of art and to have conversations about their ideas with our artist guides. Step 3 is where the art making comes into play most clearly. What better world or neighborhood do we imagine? And how do we want to impact this issue? What are the different artistic strategies we could use? What are the levers of change? Do we want to increase people's knowledge about an issue, or do we want to agitate for a policy? And helping open up students' minds too that civic action isn't just voting or isn't just policy. We spend a lot of time with students doing creative prototyping and getting feedback from their peers and other adults. And finally, we find modes for them to take creative action beyond the classroom and beyond the school. And I'll share a few of those examples. Knowing that a program of this scale and complexity takes time, from the very beginning we envisioned space as a 3-year arc, as an on-ramp, the freeway itself, and an off-ramp. I will share that the on-ramp very quickly became the freeway, but we've spent a lot of time in relationship developing and curriculum piloting. I'll also share that sustainability is one of the biggest challenges that our team is currently thinking about. How do we balance a desire to engage multiple schools from across the city with a desire to ensure that whatever we're doing with schools now doesn't disappear after we leave? We also want space to impact an entire school that we're in, but we had to think realistically about how to do that given the artists' limited bandwidth. So we focused most closely on the core arts and civics classes with the primary partner teachers working with the artists, and then we have identified as a kind of mid-band the other arts and social studies and sometimes English teachers in the school. We've engaged them in day-long professional development retreats, brought their students to the MCA, and offered them opportunities to engage with the space projects. In the outer rim are open invitations to the entire school to visit the Space Artist Studio, to come to our other teacher professional development programs, to bring their students on field trips, and to visit and engage with projects. So who is Space and what does it look like? We're working currently in 2 schools on the southwest side of Chicago. Curie Metropolitan High School was our pilot. They are Chicago's 2nd largest school, serving 3,000 students, bigger than some towns and cities. And you feel it when you're in there. We're also working with Sarah Good STEM Academy, also on Chicago's southwest side. When we were deciding on schools to partner with, we had a couple criteria. We wanted to be in schools with at least 1,000 students, so that as we were taking our time developing a program in 1 or 2 sites, we still had the opportunity to impact lots of students. We also, through a partner called Ingenuity, who's been doing a lot of work around data analysis, we were looking at what they call arts deserts. So what were the areas where either the schools or the neighborhood had, not that they didn't have incredible arts and culture happening in them already, but which schools didn't have access to the same kind of cultural partnerships and resources that other schools did. We also were aware of serving schools that had a real need for this program while balancing it with the desire to start something like this on fertile ground. So we wanted to work with schools that had a demonstrated commitment to the arts, school administrators who were ready, importantly, to devote dedicated planning time to teachers, and also give approval for student mobility, for field trips, for walks in their neighborhood, and for walking throughout the school even to be in the artist's studio. So we began the SPACE program last year at Curie Metropolitan High School and invited artist Andres Luis Hernandez to be our pilot artist. Andres is a native Chicagoan whose practice is transdisciplinary. His background is in architecture, fine arts, and education. Andres is concerned with issues of racial and spatial justice and deals a lot with urban vacancy in his work. His work often takes the form of archival research, writing, public polling, and other participatory workshops. He's also had years working in schools, and we knew that we wanted teachers and an artist who could help shape the program as much as we were. During the time that Andres was part of the program, he was invited to be a member of the exhibition design team for the Obama Presidential Center, and he's also co-representing the United States at the Architecture Biennale this summer. So I'm not saying that SPACE was the reason, but we were excited to provide a platform to help support his work. We also wanted to work with an artist who could articulate to us and to students how his work blurred the lines between what we might think of as art and the world of civics. We partnered Andres with an experimental and progressive art teacher, Valerie Zanos, who I'd worked with over the last several years, and I knew she was the kind of teacher who was hungry for change and experimentation. And we also had a totally killer civics teacher who had a citywide reputation, and we were like, we have the best team possible, nothing can go wrong, we're doing this. Oh wait, the civics teacher quit the school the day after we had our first planning meeting. So, and ultimately his replacement was not able to make the commitment that we needed. So from the very beginning of piloting this program, we had to deal with a lot of challenging but really helpful issues that helped foreground how important relationship building, sustainability, and a time commitment this program was. So we went full steam ahead working with art students and ended up organizing a cohort of other teachers who were involved with promoting civic engagement opportunities at their school. We went to their meetings, presented about ourselves, we invited them to the museum for field trips and professional development, and slowly it surfaced a few teachers who were really hungry to take a responsibility like this on, while at the same time we were able to engage more teachers than we'd envisioned, as well as their students. During the pilot year, the art students identified power, access, and community safety as the issues that they cared most about. 2 questions guided their year-long investigation. How do we reactivate spaces in which we feel we have no power? And how do we create spaces where young people can be our authentic selves? They did a lot of work around mapping, asset mapping, looking at issues of community safety, a lot of polling, inviting other students to contribute where and why they felt safe or unsafe. We partnered with the youth programs manager from the local public library, whom they'd identified as a positive ally working toward change, as well as the local neighborhood council. At the end of the year, after a lot of experiments with making art and doing walks around the neighborhood, the students decided that they wanted to have a day-long festival as the culmination of their work called Sanctuary. They wanted to invite the rest of the school and the neighborhood to share their thoughts around issues of community safety and next steps. This work was also heavily informed by the kind of participatory workshops that Andres does. So over the course of the year, they were taking a lot of cues from this artist. They divided themselves into 5 project groups and developed participatory programs that took place over the course of a whole day within the Space Artist studio and out in the front yard. Just to talk you through a couple examples, my favorite project, although this isn't the best picture, was the Lost Miami Bowl. Across the street from Curie High School is a giant vacant lot that for all the students who are currently enrolled has always existed that way. For generations before them, even 10 years before, they had memories of the Miami Bowl, a community hub that was around for generations. When students discovered this, they kept asking, why don't we have something like this now? And also, how do we honor the memories that people have of this site of community gathering? So they decided to create a bowling alley, invited students to bowl as they told them the story about the Lost Miami Bowl, with pictures and ephemera from the bowling alley, and invited students to contribute to their question, what could happen here? Another group of students decided to set up an interview booth asking about issues of safety within the school and asking other students what they felt the best action steps could be. Another group decided to go a more performative route and created a series of words on t-shirts that could do pop-up performances and spell these words, be a dot of yellow in a sea of brown concrete, and then follow up by asking participants who saw them kind of pop out of the trees what their thoughts were about sanctuary and community safety. Then there was another group that was thinking about trees as symbols of sanctuary for birds and humans, and asked people to write their responses to what sanctuary meant to them, and then help each other weave their responses with thread into what became a nest that surrounded all the trees outside the school. At the end of the project, students collected a lot of data, and we spent a lot of time in the art class talking about data as both form and content, and data collecting as an artistic practice. The students collected their findings and key action steps and shared it with school administrators, who were so impressed and moved by the students' voices that they organized a meeting with Chicago police officers, security staff, other school administrators from around the neighborhood to look at what the students had to share and use it as an opportunity to take action as the adults responsible for the well-being of young people. This project is ongoing. So knowing that Andres was likely only available for the pilot year, and indeed he was, we followed Andres' time at Curie with an artist, Samantha Hill. Samantha is also a transdisciplinary artist and considers herself as much a history nerd and a librarian as she does an artist. She has a background in photography, but also library science and teaching history. Samantha's work is concerned with rendering visible the voices and narratives that are often marginalized, particularly African American history. Her latest project, the Kinship Project, collects over 150 years of African American photography and oral histories and ephemera, and she stages these materials along with the oral histories in different settings to spark conversations about whose voices and stories are heard. When Samantha first met the students that we're working with this year, she showed them a selection from her archive, which included ephemera from Birmingham, Alabama, from 1900 to 1963. And she talked to them about the Children's Crusade of 1963 and how young people left school in the middle of the day to protest segregation. She said to them, "These young people are your age." And the students started saying, "Well, why can't we do something like that? How do we get our voices heard? How do we do something big and visible?" So the project that she's developed with them is a postcard project. They picked civic issues that they cared about. Their teachers took the lead on helping them through root cause analysis and exploring the different civic issues that underline their issues. They're designing visual images. We're printing about 3,000 of them, and then the students are organizing writing parties around the school and with other community partners in the library, in pizza parlors, and other high schools. And right now we have about 10 or 15 teachers, including the marching band, who's going to join us in a performative parade to the post office in the spring. Collaging and making their postcards. As per our expansion plans, we brought in a second artist in our second school, Damon Locks. Damon is super cool. That's my best bio for him. He's just very cool. He has a background in the music business. He's also a visual artist, a DJ, and a longtime collaborator with different community groups. He's also interested in this idea of who has voice, who has power, and he's been working for the last several years with incarcerated artists at a maximum security prison in Illinois. He also has worked for a long time with a youth dance group called Move Me Soul. So collaboration was really at the heart of all that he does. So I'd like to just share a snapshot of some of the work that he and the civics teacher did as they were thinking about how do we do a project, yes, but also how do we infuse contemporary art into all of our civics content. So when Damon was presenting his practice, students were studying the Constitution. Being a sound artist and a collector of historical speeches, he sampled different speeches from Robert Kennedy talking about a police officer arresting people unlawfully, to Martin Luther King speaking about the Constitution, Ruby Dee talking about reading the Fourth Amendment, and Nina Simone speaking about what freedom meant to her. So he sampled all of these speeches, overlaid it with contemporary music, played it for students, and it opened up a conversation about the language and relevance of the Constitution today. A few months later, a student shared with me, "I realized when Damon did his lesson with the speeches that art isn't just painting. When he brought in the speeches that had music, it made you pay attention. Like maybe it was boring, but the music actually made you want to listen and think, well, maybe this is important. This is a way that people can express their ideas." So at the moment, Damon used the speeches that he played and then did a sound piece where he invited all 100 students that he's working with to respond to the question, what would you take a knee for? Which was super topical at the time. He then overlaid that with music and played back 100 voices as a sound piece to the students, opening up a conversation around what did it feel like to have your voice heard? What did it feel like to hear what all of your peers would take a knee for? Out of that, students picked an issue, wrote a speech about it, and then Damon helped them take phrases or words from their speech and in a single day create a visual representation of that issue. We're now working in the civics and art classes to create an album of tracks where students will be doing interviews with family members and community members and thinking about answering the question, who benefits from our silence? What does it mean to have our voice heard? And how can we reclaim power by doing so? So I'm going to end my lecture here, as much as I would love to keep giving examples. And I hope that Flossie will help open up dialogue around what I've shared with you. I hope that I've made a compelling argument for how much contemporary art and artists can offer civic education by asking provocative questions, proposing alternative strategies for change, and asking us to dream together the world that we would like to live in. Thank you.
Thank you, Lydia. Now turn the floor over to Flossie, and then we'll have questions and answers afterwards. Please make sure you sign the sheet before you go so we can follow up later. Flores, yes.
So before I begin, I just want to put it out there that I just landed this morning at 7 a.m. after traveling 38 hours, you know. So if I'm not clear, let me know and I'll try to rephrase it, okay. So Helen brought up earlier on that we are involved in a new project. So at Project Zero, we have been funded for 3 years to really look at how contemporary art can function as a civic commons for young people, both here and in Australia. So it's very exciting for me to hear what Lydia has presented, because what she does resonates strongly with what we're trying to find out and trying to work in. So there are four things that I particularly resonated with. The first one is the changing role of museums for the world that we live in today. You know, the complexity and all that has been demanding really that museums move from, you know, community-centered or oriented strategies to really fostering deep civic engagement that is reciprocal, co-constructed, that connects assets and purposes, you know, across different groups and people, and to try to combat social exclusion. I think that is very powerful for me in what she's talking about. And what she brought up about the relationship that is being built that is so clearly reflexive, because it impacts not just the artists but also the students and in the schools and in the museum. So I thought that was really powerful. Making safe spaces for unsafe ideas stood out for me in what she was saying. When she talked about contemporary artistic strategies, it resonated also because I do a lot of work with Art 21 educators in New York City, and they work with contemporary artists to really think about what does it mean to do art? What does it mean to involve somebody else in this, you know, and what can we do with the art that we bring? So there were two particular strategies that she brought up that I thought would be powerful. The first one is pushing boundaries. And we know that in artistic practice, they're constantly pushing boundaries. And when that gets reflected or modeled by the artists in the school, that becomes a very powerful way to think about how I may live my life. And you know, to support young people to find their own curiosities, I think that's what they do a lot in space. And also to pursue passions and ask big questions about the world that they live in. The second thing that I thought was powerful about these strategies is helping students engage with big questions. Because I think in our own school experience, we realize that schools do not really encourage you to deal with big questions on your own terms. You know, it's always about, let's discuss a big question about how we can all together in a very intellectual way consider what can be done. You know, but in arts, I think what's powerful in her presentation is that the students are asked to respond in a very real, individual way that's resonant with their own values, their own lived experience. So that was really moving for me. And also providing students with both, not just the physical tools to represent what they're thinking, but the conceptual tools. So how does an artist think about the problems? You know, that is different from how an architect would think about it, how a scientist would think about it. That's also a powerful thing for them to think about and to realize multiple possibilities, you know, many paths towards realizing one single idea, but knowing that there's never a single way or a good way to deal with it. You know, thinking about how ideas evolve rather than they become resolved or completed. I think that's also really powerful for me. Contextualizing the curiosity for the kids by making them deal with local issues. You know, instead of something that's just very vague and like a broad issue like climate change, let's talk about climate change. But you know, climate change in Chicago, in your neighborhood, you know, in your school. I think by contextualizing their curiosity, you get them to really think about, you know, why they need to learn certain things, why they want to create certain things, and how to understand the power of having a story to tell. Because a lot of this is about a story, you know, what is our story, what is my story, and what is the story of Chicago and of, you know, the US experience. The last thing that resonated with me was something that I've been reading up about. You know, there's a political scientist at the Kennedy School. His name is Robert Putnam, and he came up with the idea of social capital. I think most of you know this idea. But there was a distinction that he made at some point about bonding social capital and bridging social capital. And this is clearly about bridging, because bonding is about working with like-minded people, people who are like yourself, and bridging is about different people. You know, how do you bridge across difference? And I thought that was really something that Space has been doing. So I have been very excited about this. These are ideas that we can bring back to our own project. So here are 5, actually 6. Okay, I'll just go with 5 questions or puzzles that continue to just move about in my mind. The first one for you, Lydia, is really how do the students conceptualize contemporary art, the civic, the community and action? How do they do that? And what are some cultural inflections that they've had to deal with as they grapple with these big ideas? Who gets to decide what is the civic, what is the community, and what is action for them? The second question is, who and what does radical change include and exclude? Particularly when we start thinking about how young people developmentally may not be able to deal with some of the complexities and the difficulties of contemporary art. Some contemporary art can be very confronting, right? So how do we start to think about radical change in those terms? The third question I have is, what have you found in terms of the transfer of learning? So at Project Zero, we work a lot on transfer, right? We try to understand what does that mean. And one of the things that we have found is that if you want transfer, you have to design for transfer. So what are some ways that you have designed for transfer in your project? And the last question is really something that I'm still trying to grapple with. What about contemporary art specifically supports civic engagement, that other disciplines cannot? Because I can imagine architecture could have done what the first artist did, history could have done what the second one did. So what is special about it, or what is distinctive that we can highlight as a way of helping students engage with civic issues?
Would you like to pick up lots of questions before we have Q&A? Happy.
Goodness, those are so many good questions, and some of them were questions within questions.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, have a stab at just giving a general.
Sure. Yeah, I do think that the question of what is it about contemporary art, and I have ideas about that, but I would also say that this program was started at a museum of contemporary art, and I don't think we're trying to make the claim. I do think the more, if there was an architect in residence at a school, an urban designer in residence at a school, I don't think that this work is the work of contemporary artists, and only contemporary artists can do this. I think we were capitalizing on the fact that we are a contemporary art museum. And I think, what is it about contemporary art? Something that this is maybe overly simplistic, but a lot of the work that we do is seeing thousands of school kids for tours. And we start by asking the questions, what is a museum? What's art? What is contemporary art? And how are we going to have a conversation today that's maybe different than the conversation you have in school? And I think even starting from the idea that when you look at a work of contemporary art and talk about it, there isn't a right answer, already creates a different way for students to engage with what they're looking at and some of the ideas. I think we also think about contemporary art as a catalyst for something bigger. That contemporary art images, again, they ask provocative questions of us and maybe inspire confusion or alarm or disgust or excitement or pleasure. And I think that those are all helpful emotions in starting to open up larger questions about our world. On one of the tours that I was watching earlier this year with one of the space groups, we were looking at a work of art by an artist, Amanda Williams, who looks a lot at issues of urban vacancy. And one of the artist guides was basically saying, artists make work about the world so that we can talk, they make work about issues so that we can talk about them. So I guess I think contemporary art provides a really flexible springboard for dialogue and debate, and imagining new possibilities outside of traditional disciplines that opens up learning in a way that certainly other disciplines can, but we're perhaps uniquely poised to do. I think in terms of the transfer of learning, I don't know if I'm missing a specific definition around that, but I think of the work of the space program as highly collaborative and relying very much on the expertise of everyone who's involved in it. And I think we model the process of, we can't do the space program without a civics teacher helping us figure out how to do some of that work, and the art teacher helping us do that work, and the artist helping us do that work. And I think modeling, young people see the ways that we're modeling that form of engagement and modeling how we're transferring learning to one another as the adults who are kind of leading the program. And I think throughout the steps of the project, we're also making sure that students are taking ownership of their work and that the projects have to include engagement and participation with other people and that they have to apply the learning. So the projects don't end with an idea for something that you might share with somebody. It's shared. So they're then acting as the teachers or facilitators. So I'm not sure if that gets at your question.
Well, I was wondering whether you have some examples of students who brought what they've learned into other novel contexts, that are not within space, for instance, into their own lives, into the other subjects that they're studying, into decisions that
I mean, I can think of one example. There was one artist who we were working with last year who applied on his own to be part of a teen festival that we produce. And he basically took some of the ideas that we've been talking about in the space program and decided to do his own art project. He was also someone who had to drop out of the school late in the year because of failing grades, but instead of walking away from school, he took part in this accelerated class so that he could graduate high school and is trying to pursue an art degree. He was also invited back to be a guest artist for one of our family days because we were so excited by the work he was doing. Now, of course, we had a pre-existing relationship with him, but he's now on a path where he's thinking about becoming an artist and staying engaged in the process. I think for the other students, there's another student who was also in the class last year who was already set on being a community organizer, but like very, like I want to work for I want to go to college and then work for the Chicago Teachers Union, that kind of thing. And I think the program started to open up different possibilities for how she could do that political work, but maybe not in that particular path that she had envisioned. And with the other students, I frankly think it's too soon into the program, but I'm excited to see what happens.
Thank you. So, questions from the floor and comments from the floor. Who'd like to start? Aisha.
Hi. Thank you so much for that. That was wonderful. Art and civic engagement. And so I'm really interested in, obviously you talked about CPS guiding how you and just these sort of how we can sort of quantify the wonderful work that obviously anecdotally and qualitatively is wonderful. About it in terms of data, how do we quantify that?
Yeah, it's such a great question, and we're actually kind of in the process of figuring that out, because we articulated these 4 student learning outcomes around research and analysis and planning for change, and we're working with an outside evaluator. We're doing like pre and post surveys that are around both knowledge and attitudes. We're doing focus groups. We're doing a series of one-on-one conferrings where we're looking at their artifacts of work and asking them questions that are trying to get at, what did you learn? What were the aesthetic choices you made and why? We're developing project rubrics that can also help students. We can articulate out loud for students, what do we mean by a civically engaged art project? I think one of the unanticipated, big parts of the program is students' social emotional learning and kind of sense of their own civic and personal agency. And I mean, when I was saying earlier, we thought the artist would play an important role in students' social emotional learning. We didn't really set up any formal mechanisms to capture that, but that's been such a hugely important part of the program. So we're thinking about it. If there's models that you have in your field that you can share with me, I would love to know how to do more concrete work around pinning down, the like feel-good emotions, but actually having some data to back that up, because we know that it's making an impact in that way.
I may just interject. I think the Columbus Museum of Art, they've done a whole series of now my mind is just clouding over. But a whole series of investigations into the impact of their Center for Arts and Civic Engagement as well. And I think they should be able to release it to you if you write to them. So maybe after this, I could give you the name of the person you can write to. She was also from AIE. Yeah.
She produced some very good students.
Yeah.
Thank you for this. I'm interested in this model of artist, art teacher, civic teacher as a pairing, and I'm wondering especially about how you see the role of you or the museum educator who is part of this. Mm-hmm. What are the relationships in this pairing, mm-hmm. and also what are the expectations of these roles as these individuals are working together on this project?
Yeah, those are great questions. My role, in addition to a lot of my role in, obviously the creation of the program was thinking big picture about the model and the curricular framework. I think of my role really as a relationship builder and someone who helps make sure with that, that we're all going on kind of the same path. But there's also a lot of interpersonal dynamics to just figuring out if we're a team for 2 or 3 years, how do we work together and how do we best plan and how do we capture what we're doing? We also, again, set up the program in a way that we really relied on the expertise of each teacher and their discipline to inform what the curriculum could look like. So I think the art teachers tend to have more flexibility in what they can teach. The civics and social studies teachers have basically come to us and said, we just start with what do you have to do in your class? What are the constraints that you're working with? And then how do we start to think about, what's the stuff that you have to cover that you're just gonna cover? You're gonna talk about the branches of government. We can maybe bring in some art. What are some of the places in your own teaching practice that you need help around? So as you're covering certain content areas, a lot of teachers are like, I need help improving students' questioning skills. How do we have robust debates? So it's kind of like a needs assessment and an asset mapping of what are the teachers bringing to the table in terms of curriculum and teaching skills, where do they need our support, and then how do we start to think about curriculum development that's also professional development for the teachers. So the expectation is that we are planning out the curriculum together. Kind of big picture, what are the projects, how are we kind of moving students from the world we're in step to the planning for change, but then, and also figuring out, what does the artist take over? So what does the artist kind of go to their studio, come up with and deliver to students, and then how is the teacher continuing that dialogue or those ideas when the artist isn't in the room? The artist is there with the students at least once a week, but so a lot of the work that I'm helping just have conversations about is how does space keep happening even when the artist is.
Outcomes for the students, if it's participating in a program like this has changed strategy or has had a big impact on the way that they conceptualize their own work, or if you guys have
Yeah, so it was interesting because when we first laid out the kind of outcomes for the stakeholders that weren't the students, we realized upon reflecting them that there was kind of more of a checklist than outcomes. The artist will embed their studio practice. They will teach. The teachers will have the artist in their classroom. And what we started thinking about was, kind of to my point earlier, for the teachers, where are the gaps in your, assuming that all of these teachers are experts at their craft, which they are, what are the areas of professional development that a program like this could offer you? What areas of questioning, of teaching certain content, like where do you keep getting stuck, and how can this program help you? And then having conversations with them kind of through formal conferrings with our evaluator of how is this program able to move the needle on areas of growth that you had in your own teaching practice.
Hi, my name's Jacob. I'm in Arts and Ed, and also a Chicagoan. So hello. Very exciting and makes total sense, and everything you said about the ecosystem in the way that you situated this project. And I'm very excited to hear about it. And I guess I'm curious, have you thought at all about how you might scale a project like this or scale aspects of it? Because it does not strike me as an inexpensive project, right? And so if you're trying to have an impact, where are you at, both personally and organizationally with that question?
Yeah, thank you. And I think there were a couple lines in my notes that around that I forgot to speak to. Yes, the $1 million question did not result in a $1 million grant, but we were very generously funded by the Crown Family Fund. But we have been thinking a lot about what is scalable, what's replicable, and what isn't. And it's been really helpful for me to figure that out through engaging that kind of mid-band of teachers at the schools, so the other arts and social studies teachers who have heard about the program to some extent or not, who have interest or not, and thinking about, well, actually to go back, we know that in the civics requirement, the teachers need to be covering discussions around current and controversial issues, simulations of the democratic process, and service learning. And so we've kind of looked at that and said, okay, we can give, especially the more that we do the program, we have tools that are like ready to go. They've been in our wheelhouse for years. We can help you have conversations about current and controversial issues. Come to us for PD, anybody, come to us for PD for 4 hours and we're gonna give you some tools. Service learning projects, through the work of the SPACE program, we're starting to create frameworks. Like the postcard project was started through Curie students and the Curie collaboration, but it's something that a teacher at another school could do. So the more that we're able to produce projects in collaboration with all the SPACE participants, I think even this time next year, we'll have a ton of models and frameworks that teachers can do, maybe not in the same way as having an embedded artist, but that are scalable and replicable. So we're really thinking about what are the parts of SPACE that we can transfer and kind of coach other teachers on. And then I think the big question is, if the embedded artist is the key feature of the program, that's a question. That's a question, and that is a big investment in time and resources. But I think there are ways of scaling how an artist could work in a public school that isn't 15 hours a week every week for the whole school year. For 3 years.
I'm wondering what compensation crossed over in programs long term.
Yeah. I don't think I'm at liberty to share specific numbers, but I will say that the biggest part of the budget is supporting those artists. They're being paid generously for their time. The equivalent, they're contract employees, but it's the equivalent of a fairly robust part-time staff salary. We also, my boss and I sat down and categorized what are all of the roles and responsibilities of this artist. How many hours is that taking a week? So across these 6 categories of tasks, out of these 15 hours a week, or like how many hours are there? And then we've broken it down, so we figured out more or less how much we're paying an artist per hour. Because and then really helping, I think another one of my roles is kind of making sure that the artist is not going like way over their hours. We all know that this kind of work doesn't end when we go home at night. It's like just part of our lives. Yeah. But I think even having on paper, like, this is how much we're paying you because because you are going to be working 320 hours. And of those hours, this is what we're expecting of your time. So that kind of generosity financially, but also being really transparent about what we're paying them for and how we want to support them in spending their time. Yes, we do provide, it is not at the same level as the artists, but we do provide compensation for teachers acknowledging all of the planning time that they put into the program.
I have a question about your professional development. So I know, I'm just wondering if it's like just within that first year, sessions with the teaching team.
Yeah, so the professional development is, I think it's a work in progress. As the more we do it, the more we realize, like, oh, we need to do a day-long workshop about X, Y, or Z. So we've organized a kind of summer retreat where, and I should also say, we're drawing on a lot of models from programs that exist already. So we have a year-long teacher institute that teachers apply to with an idea for a socially engaged art project. Ultimately, that idea usually changes because it's meant to be done in collaboration with their students. They spend an entire week with us in the summer, and we spend a lot of time talking about what is contemporary art, how do you use works of contemporary art to spark dialogue, and how do you design curriculum in collaboration with your students. So we've done that enough times that we kind of extracted, like, how do we do in a week with these teachers into 2 days for the space teams, which we're going to expand this summer because we know we need more planning time before the craze of the school year starts. So we've basically been taking all the modules from professional development that we've done already and doing it with teachers over the summer, and then about quarterly, a mix of like planning meetings / professional development. I have also been doing professional development for myself around civic education so that I can be more informed about content, but also just, you know, I've spent most of my time sitting in rooms with art teachers and a couple social studies teachers. It's been really valuable for me to go to conferences or different meetings where it's just a room filled with social studies and civics teachers to hear about where the common struggles and challenges are, and then what kind of professional development we can start to create.
Could we have more? Could we have more?
I'm glad you asked it. Got me going on. Seems to me that the embedded artist is a apart from all
Right.
an artist in it. Beautiful about it. The three that you named are completely different. And each that's the seems to be intention. So that's there are all of the practical.
Yes, think about that too. And yes, I think beautiful is ultimately the best word to describe everything that arises with so many personalities in particular. Yeah, I don't think that I have an answer to that because I'm thinking about that really deeply as well. Because I think part of, you know, I was saying like the artists are doing their art in the schools. I was on the phone with Samantha the other week and she was saying, I'm doing my art, like I haven't, oh my God, I thought I wasn't gonna do a social practice project, like I'm doing my art. And it was so exciting. And art is really unpredictable, and art that involves human relationships is unpredictable and complicated and problematic. And I feel like there need to be, you know, in conversations or thinking about how to replicate this, how do we start to maybe get on paper, because a lot of that is that is so much of what my job is kind of seeing that from a bit more of a bird's eye view and helping orchestrate those relationships as best I can. And I think that there's work that I need to do to just like get some of that stuff on paper. And even in approaching other schools that we work with or approaching like another museum who might want to do something like this, like, are you ready and prepared and trained to support all of these things that are going to happen? Do you have the money and the time and the interest to invest in what it means to support an artist working this way in a school? So I think it's it's a deeper conversation than do you want to learn how to use art to talk about issues?
I'm really interested in this idea of the artist as a civic actor.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting, each of the artists you've chosen represent, in some ways, a certain set of progressive ideals or values that they hold and relate to their own understanding of civics.
Mm-hmm.
If this was to be transferred elsewhere or used elsewhere, to what degree is it important that the artists or civic teachers share these? I'm wondering about artists who are not as incorporated, for example, in the collection of the MCA, who do what could be called socially engaged work, but around topics that some of these artists might find repugnant, or like materially, or perhaps wrong or bad. So like, what ethical quotient is involved, I guess is my real question here, when you're thinking about civics and artistry, and how do you navigate that if there are different ideas about what good civic action should be?
One of the biggest things that I struggle with is about transporting these art practices into other spaces. Because what you think is civic here in the US may not be civic in Singapore, where I come from.
Sure,
And it becomes very confronting when you bring something to me and, you know, in my school, and we cannot, we cannot identify with that. So I think one of the questions that I asked was, what counts as even community? What counts as, civic? What is that space that we are all trying to work in? And it's very challenging because in the work that we do with Art 21, we have an artist like LaToya Ruby Frazier, right? She is in your face about what she thinks about corporations trying to, what is it called? Sort of steal or sabotage communities and things like that. And then you have someone like Anne Miley, right, who tells you she's not about violence. She's not against war, but her work is so much about war. So how do you navigate that kind of space in communities in Chicago where I can imagine diversity, right, is the new normal?
Yeah, those are great and those are great questions and not easy to answer. But my initial answer is that we hired artists who are educators. We hired artists who have like 10, 20 plus years of working with young people. And these artists are not, and of course there's a really fine line, because if you're moving your studio practice into the school and you have particular stances around the criminal justice system, not a, you know, their values are not a mystery. But I think that, but their role is to be an artist educator, and their role is to hold space and hold room for differing opinions. I mean, within the classes that they're working with, students are on all different sides of the political spectrum. I mean, at Curie High School, there are a lot of students that are recipients of DACA in a class with other students who have very strong anti-immigrant sentiment. So, you know, and Samantha's like, I certainly have my opinions, but what I'm going to help do through, and like, I'm transparent, these are my opinions, but the work isn't about my opinions, it's how do we start to have a respectful dialogue and debate. And I think a question that we have asked is like, where do we draw the lines around certain, like, what are the values that maybe can't be compromised on, while we also allow space for students to talk through their opinions? Because a lot of times, I mean, I think this is like one of the reasons that we need civic education, is those spaces for young people to have debate face to face, eye to eye, with each other, with the artist, with the teachers. And so we've hired people that have the skill set to put their, you know, their own feelings on the back burner and help kind of uncover those questions. That said, you know, the museum is making, in the same way that we make decisions about which artists to show or have in our collection, we are making a certain set of decisions about what artists are representing the space program. And I could imagine if there are other institutions that take something like this on, that could look different than it does for us. Yeah.
There's a sort of tension, I think, in what we're doing, more emphasis. I mean, we're talking about civic education and art. And one might argue that civic education has a number of goals. Certainly you pointed out that one of the issues you're addressing is finding a space to discussing controversial issues. I was wondering whether or not there's any also in what you're doing for if you like action. Now you mentioned service learning, didn't you?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm just wondering if there's any way in which what you're doing, what the schools are doing, has some kind of goal for actual doing something in the community as a consequence of what they're doing. In other words, going out of the school and making a space where they can discuss these issues and be expressive. Are they also being activists?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And I think something that we've talked about, and this is not a model that we made up, but there's, and I should have included this image, but Americans for the Arts have this wonderful image that's called the Continuum of Impact that asks the question, what difference can art and culture make? And it starts from knowledge, attitudes, discourse, values, action, policy, and showing that to students to say there is a spectrum of what action, action or activism can look like. And also helping students, I mean, I may have mentioned this before, but I think what I heard from the civics teachers was a kind of letdown when student civic action projects were like hosting a food drive one day, or writing a letter to their senator, or they came up with all these ideas for policy changes around gun violence, but then nothing happened. So, you know, and also saying like civic change takes time, and if you guys are like really set on changing policy, this is going to be the beginning of a lifelong, you know, commitment to something that you care about. But I think starting to open up action as maybe you guys have decided as a class that you really want to move the needle on how people are thinking about recipients of DACA, you know, or how the school is what policies the school has in place for issues of safety, or how we can start to build more bridges between the students in the neighborhood and local community organizations. So I think the goals, we're somewhat putting that on students to figure out, like, where do you guys want to hit? And if it's policy, like, we can start, but we're not going to get there in a semester or a year. But absolutely, I mean, I think the sanctuary project it took place outdoors. We invited hundreds, we had maybe 50 or so people from the community, but that's more than usually walk off the street and into the school. And again, the data that students collected was served to the administrators as a call to action. Like, what new policies are you guys as the adults going to create? With the postcard project, we're going to be mailing 3,000 letters to a series of local and state officials that the students have researched who have strong stances and access to, power around the issues that they care about. So there is direct action, and it has to happen outside the classroom.
I think there's two particular current issues, highly contemporary issues, where you imagine the students are personally deeply engaged, and actually in both cases they have actually, many young people have taken action. Me Too is one of them, and of course in the last few days Parkland is the other one. And I mean, it's probably too soon for you to think about either of those, but they will be examples where students are going to feel it personally relevant to their own lives, as well as something they actually might want to do something about.
Yeah, no, I mean, we've been talking about that. And I think that's where, again, art opens up different possibilities for what, art as action might look different than, the postcard project, ultimately, there's a lot involved, but it is postcards being mailed to representatives, which is operating in a fairly traditional civic engaged model. But the students at Good thinking about working on this album, they're creating content, they're getting their voices out there, and Damon is interested and has some interest from community partners who would use the tracks of the student voices to then create more work, like with the dance group. Or some of the content of the album would be informed by exchanges between the students and the inmates at Stateville Correctional Institute. So we're still working that out, but the students are thinking about those issues, and I think, art opens up different possibilities for how to make their voices heard.
Thank you very much for your extremely intelligent questions.
Yes,
thank you
so
so much, Lydia and Elsa. Great to have you. Good luck with the rest of the project in the future.
Thank you. Thank you for your question.